Welcome to the deep dive. We're really glad you could join us. Minnesota, it's one of those states many of us feel like we know. That image, the land of 10,000 lakes, it just pops into your head. But what if I told you that number is actually much, much higher, and that the lakes are really just the surface of a much deeper story?
That's a perfect way to frame it. It's quite remarkable, really, when you dig in. So many of those things we associate with Minnesota, the lakes, definitely, but also that Minnesota nice culture. They're deeply, profoundly rooted. We're talking ancient geology, the complex flow of human history, very unique cultural streams feeding into it. It's truly captivating once you start peeling back those layers.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we want to do today in this deep dive. We're aiming to move past the stereotypes, get beyond the usual images. We want to uncover Minnesota's surprisingly diverse history, its really unique geography, that vibrant, always evolving culture, and its, incredibly robust and innovative economy. Think of this as your shortcut, your way to really grasp what makes the North Star State tick. For you listening, this is about getting a full picture of a really fascinating part of the U.S., hopefully filled with some aha moments, and some real insights into what makes it so distinctive. So let's get started. Let's unpack this.
Definitely. And to really understand Minnesota today, you have to start at the beginning with its foundations.
Yeah.
A fascinating place to kick things off is the name itself. Minnesota. Where does that actually come from? What do our sources say?
Yeah, it sounds so, American now, doesn't it? But the name Minnesota, our sources show its roots go way back, deep into the Dakota language. It comes from Nisota. And what's really interesting here is that there isn't just one single meaning. There are actually two common interpretations.
That's right. One version you hear a lot translates Nisota as clear blue water. It paints that picture, right? Beautiful, pristine lakes reflecting the sky. But there's another interpretation, maybe a bit more subtle. It suggests Minnesota means cloudy water, or maybe whitish water. And the story goes, the Dakota people would actually show early Europeans what they meant. They'd drop a little milk into water.
Wow.
Yeah, it makes it cloudy, but it still has this clarity, or maybe it reflects the sky differently, shimmeringly. It really speaks to a deep observation of nature.
That is such a vivid picture. It really gives you insight. And once you know that Dakota root, ni for water, you start seeing it everywhere. It's literally written on the landscape.
Right.
Think about famous spots like Minnehaha Falls. That translates to curling water or waterfall.
Right.
Or Lake Minnetonka, big water, Minnetrista, crooked water. The language itself is mapping the state's features.
It's a powerful linguistic legacy, absolutely. And it even shows up in the name of the state's biggest city, Minneapolis. What's fascinating about Minneapolis is that the name is a hybrid. It takes that Dakota Mini for water and combines it with the Greek word opolis, meaning city. So Minneapolis literally means water city.
Water city. I love that.
And if you look at the bigger picture, the state seal even includes the phrase, Nosotomacoche.
Yeah.
That's the Dakota name for their broader ancestral lands in the region. And it translates beautifully to the land where the water reflects the skies.
Oh.
It's poetic, a profound connection to the land, showing how much the original inhabitants revered their environment.
It truly is. It says so much about that intrinsic connection. And speaking of those early inhabitants, Minnesota's human history goes back way, way further than any European ships arriving. Our sources point to this long, incredibly rich history of Native American life, stretching back to the woodland period. We're talking like the 11th century BCE.
Yeah, and within that huge span of time, you see these really significant indigenous cultures developing, shaping the land long before outsiders showed up. For instance, around 200 to 500 CE, you had two distinct pockets of the Hopewell tradition. There was the Laurel Complex up north, known for its unique pottery, and the Temple of Hopewell down south along the Mississippi River Valley. Then later, around 1000 CE, the Upper Mississippian culture emerged. This included the Oneota people and other Siouan speakers. These were complex societies, and they were thriving right up until the Europeans arrived in the 17th century.
So when those first Europeans did show up, mostly French voyagers, missionaries, fur traders in the 1600s, they walked into a region already buzzing with diverse cultures. They encountered the Dakota, the Ojibwe, various Anishinaabe groups. And our sources really highlight the importance of a place called Grand Portage. It wasn't just, a path to carry canoes. It was a vital gateway. It gave them crucial access to the trapping and trading areas deeper inside what would become Minnesota and beyond.
Right, a real linchpin for the fur trade. But what's really important to understand here is that European arrival wasn't the only major dynamic happening. Even among the native groups, there was significant migrations going on, and that led to tensions. The Anishinaabe, also known as the Ojibwe or Chippewa, they were moving westward into what's now Minnesota. And that migration, unfortunately, caused friction, sometimes conflict, with the Dakota people who were already there. It specifically led to the Imde-Wakanton being pushed out of their ancestral lands around Mille Lacs Lake. So it was a complex human landscape, shifting power balances long before the colonial period really took hold.
It's a multi-layered story, even before the colonial powers started drawing lines on maps. And speaking of maps, our sources mention several key early explorers who were really instrumental in charting this territory. They were laying the groundwork for future claims and settlement. People like Daniel Greysolon, Sieur du Lut, Father Louis Hennepin,
Yeah.
Jonathan Carver, Henry Schoolcraft, and Joseph Nicolet later on. Their expeditions weren't just about seeing what was there, they were about defining it, claiming it.
And that naturally leads us into the, well, sometimes confusing but really fascinating story of how Minnesota's territory evolved before it became a state. The land changed hands quite a bit. A lot of what's now Minnesota was originally part of French Louisiana. But there was this brief period, not many people know about this, from 1762 to 1802, when it was actually under Spanish control, part of Spanish Louisiana.
That's a detail you definitely don't hear often in the standard U.S. expansion story. Okay, so then after the American Revolution, the part of the state east of the Mississippi River officially became U.S. territory with the Second Treaty of Paris. But the land west of the Mississippi, which is a much bigger chunk, that came with a huge Louisiana Purchase in 1803.
Right. But even after the Louisiana Purchase, there were still disputes, particularly up in the Red River Valley. It's very fertile land. The British Hudson's Bay Company contested the U.S. claim there. That wasn't fully settled until the Treaty of 1818, which set the border along the 49th parallel. And that wasn't just a line on a map. It defined a big part of the state's northern edge and really shaped future trade and settlement.
Then comes 1805, a really pivotal year. Zebulon Pike negotiated with Native Americans to get land right where the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers meet, a crucial spot. The purpose was specifically to build a military reservation, plant an early American flag, basically. And between 1819 and 1825, they built Fort Snelling. It became this key strategic outpost.
And Fort Snelling wasn't just military. It actually played a big role in the area's economic beginnings.
Yeah.
The soldiers there used the water power at St. Anthony Falls
Right, the falls.
to build a grist mill and a sawmill. These were incredibly important early industries. They basically foreshadowed the huge water-powered factories that would later make Minneapolis boom. It kind of laid the groundwork for the city's whole economic engine, almost by accident, spurred by the military presence.
And like often happens around force, a civilian settlement started popping up nearby. Squatters, traders, government folks. But then, in 1839, the army kicked them off the military land. Our sources say most of these people just moved a little way downriver, settled right outside the reservation boundary, and that move, that relocation, essentially founded the city that became St. Paul, born right out of that forced move. It shows you the sometimes harsh realities of frontier life.
So before it was Minnesota, this land was juggled around quite a bit administratively. It was part of the territory of Missouri for a while. Then it was just unorganized territory. Later, it got lumped in with Wisconsin, Iowa, even parts of the Dakotas under the territory of Michigan. It bounced between the territory of Wisconsin, territory of Iowa. This constant redrawing of lines just highlights how fluid things were during American expansion.
Quite the administrative journey. But then, a really key step. Minnesota Territory is officially created on March 3, 1849. It gets its own distinct identity. The first territorial legislature met just a few months later. And what's really striking is who dominated it. Mostly men with New England roots.
That demographic point is crucial. Thousands of pioneers were pouring into the territory then. They were drawn by the promise of land farming, logging. And this huge influx, especially from New England, brought a specific set of cultural values, political ideas. This all leads up to Minnesota becoming the 32nd U.S. state on May 11, 1858. And that early dominance by New Englanders earned it that nickname, the New England of the West. It's a vital piece of context for understanding the state's later character.
That really does set the stage. You have the name rooted in Dakota language, complex early encounters, but unfortunately that stage also holds some incredibly difficult and pivotal moments, like the Dakota War of 1862. It's a very somber chapter, but one that profoundly shaped Minnesota's future path.
It absolutely did. And if you connect this back to the bigger picture, Understanding these foundations, from the language to the land claims, it reveals how Minnesota's identity was forged. It was this complex mix of abundant resources, diverse peoples, and yes, tragically, forced land cessions and conflict. The Dakota War is a stark reminder of that difficult history.
Exactly. Our sources give a pretty clear, though grim, picture of what led up to the Dakota War in 1862. These treaties between the U.S. government and the Eastern Dakota and Ojibwe peoples had systematically pushed Native Americans onto smaller and smaller reservations. And conditions on those reservations for the Eastern Dakota got really bad. Promises were broken, people were starving, tensions just reached a breaking point.
What's so tragic is how one desperate act can ignite something so much larger and more devastating. The war itself started on August 17th. 4 young Dakota men, out searching for food, killed a white settler family. That very night, a faction of Little Crow's Eastern Dakota decided they had to try and drive all the settlers out of the Minnesota River Valley. It was a desperate act born from years of hardship and broken treaties.
The fighting that followed was brutal and intense. It lasted 6 weeks. Hundreds of settlers were killed, thousands fled the area terrified. Our sources estimate maybe as many as 800 settlers died. It just highlights the terrible human cost on all sides.
And the aftermath for the Eastern Dakota was just horrific. They were defeated. Around 2,000 were taken into custody. And these people were then exiled, sent away to the Crow Creek Reservation over in Dakota Territory. On top of that, somewhere between 4,500 and 5,000 Dakota, mostly women and children, fled the state entirely, seeking refuge up in Canada, in Rupert's Land. A massive displacement.
And the official response within Minnesota was shockingly harsh. Governor Alexander Ramsey actually declared publicly that, quote, "The Sioux Indians of Minnesota must be exterminated or driven forever beyond the borders of the state." He even put a bounty on Dakota scalps, $25 initially, later raised to $200 by the next governor, Henry Swift.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, and our sources say bounties were paid out, including one for Little Crow himself after he was killed.
This dark period also includes the forced internment camp at Fort Snelling. Over 1,600 Dakota, mostly women, children, and elders, were forced to march from the Lower Sioux Agency to Fort Snelling. They were held there through the winter of 62-63, waiting for riverboats to take them out of Minnesota to Crow Creek. The commander at the fort, William Crooks, tried to offer some protection. He built a fence around their camp on Pike Island to keep soldiers and settlers away. But the conditions were just awful. Between 125 and 300 people died from disease during that internment.
And the trials that followed were also deeply problematic, raising huge questions about justice. About 400 Dakota men were put on trial after the war. A staggering 303 were sentenced to death. President Abraham Lincoln reviewed the cases himself. He ended up approving 39 of those death sentences. Then, in December 1862, 38 men were hanged together in Mankato. It's still the largest mass execution in U.S. history.
And the land grabs didn't stop there. Ramsey, the governor who called for extermination, he resigned in early '63 to become the federal Indian commissioner, and he used that powerful position to get even more native land. That same year, he negotiated the Treaty of Old Crossing, which forced the Ojibwe to give up all their land in northern Minnesota and move on to reservations. It's a critical, incredibly somber part of Minnesota's story. It shaped everything that came after.
Yeah.
And it's so important we talk about this complex, painful past, honestly, acknowledging the impact it had, the scars it left.
Absolutely. That difficult history is undeniably part of the state's fabric, but woven alongside it is also this incredible story of economic growth and innovation. So let's shift gears a bit and look at how Minnesota grew from that frontier outpost into an industrial force. Our sources say logging, farming, and railroads were really the big three early on, the backbone of the economy.
That's right. Logging was huge. You see sawmills popping up at St. Anthony Falls, of course, and major logging centers booming in places like Pine City, Marine on St. Croix, Stillwater, Winona. These towns were all on rivers, which was perfect for floating massive amounts of timber down to the markets.
And that water power, especially at St. Anthony Falls, it became absolutely crucial for another industry that just exploded, flour milling. Our sources talk about how millers in Minneapolis came up with innovations that led to this new kind of flour called Minnesota patent flour.
Yes, the patent flour.
Apparently, it was so much better quality, it sold for almost twice the price of the old baker's flour it replaced. By 1900, Minnesota mills, think Pillsbury, Northwestern, Washburn, Crosby, which later became General Mills, they were grinding something like 14.1% of the entire nation's grain. That's just incredible industrial power.
It really is.
Yes.
And beyond timber and flour, you have the iron mining industry taking off.
Yeah.
Big discoveries were made, the Vermilion Range, then the Mesabi Range in the 1880s, and the Cuyuna Range a bit later, early 1900s. The ore got shipped by rail to Duluth and Two Harbors, these critical Great Lakes ports. From there, it went east on ships via the Great Lakes, basically fueling America's Industrial Revolution. That raw material extraction was fundamental.
So as we move into the 20th century, this industrial growth, manufacturing taking off, it starts pulling people from the countryside into the cities, a gradual shift, though farming, remained really important across the state. But then the Great Depression hits. What did that look like in Minnesota?
Oh, it hit hard. Very hard. Farmers saw prices for their crops just plummet. Iron miners faced massive layoffs. There was a lot of labor unrest. And on top of all that economic hardship, western Minnesota and the Dakotas got slammed by that terrible drought from 1931 to 35. The Dust Bowl was a reality there. But the New Deal programs did offer some relief, some jobs, a bit of a turnaround. For Native Americans, things like the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, provided work on reservations, and the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934 was really significant. It gave tribes more self-government, promoted respect for tribal customs, and importantly, ended the official suppression of their religious ceremonies and languages.
That's a huge shift in policy, acknowledging sovereignty like that. And the innovation didn't stop at the Depression. After World War II, industrial development really picked up speed again. New technology boosted farm productivity like crazy automation, machine milking, specialized planting techniques. University of Minnesota professor Norman Borlaug was a key figure here, contributing massively to the Green Revolution that changed global agriculture.
Right, Borlaug's work was transformative.
And this increased mobility in tech allowed for more specialized jobs everywhere, pushing Minnesota beyond just raw materials.
Exactly. Minnesota really pivoted into a major technology center after WWII. You had companies like Engineering Research Associates, formed in '46 to build computers for the Navy. That company eventually got merged into Remington Rand, then Sperry Rand. Then, a key guy, William Norris, leaves Sperry in 1957 to start Control Data Corporation, CDC, a huge early computer company.
CEC, yeah, I know that name.
And later, Seymour Cray, who's often called the father of supercomputing, he leaves CDC to start Cray Research. Both became giants in the computing world, really putting Minnesota on the tech map. And on the medical side, you have Medtronic starting up in the Twin Cities in 1949. That was the beginning of this huge medical device sector.
Medtronic.
And, of course, the Mayo Clinic. Founded way back in 1864 in Rochester, it grew into one of the world's leading medical centers. By the 21st century, it was Minnesota's largest private employer. This diversification from resources to high-tech, world-class healthcare, it's a defining feature of Minnesota's economic story.
It's really fascinating, that pivot from farming and mining to tech and medicine. Our sources also mention the Minnesota Miracle in 1971 under Governor Wendell Anderson. That was about reforming school funding and local government finance, making taxation and education fair across the state. And Minnesota's had some pretty unconventional governors too, right? Like Rudy Perpich, a former dentist, and Jesse Ventura, the former pro wrestler, both definitely got national attention.
They certainly did.
Yeah.
And this evolution in leadership, combined with the economic and social shifts, it's all tied up with Minnesota's unique political identity. Which makes you ask, right, how does a state once called the New England of the West, built on farming and logging, turn into this diverse, progressive, tech-savvy place, while holding on to such a distinct and consistent political character? It points to some really deep-seated values and constant adaptation. That influence from European immigrants, especially those connected to the failed 1848 revolutions in Scandinavia, Germany, Central Europe, that probably played a role. They brought progressive political ideas with them, contributing to Minnesota becoming a center for labor and social activism.
That makes perfect sense. It wasn't just raw materials being imported, but political ideals too. And Minnesota really was ahead of the curve on progressive reforms in the late 19th, early 20th centuries, pushing for labor rights, women's suffrage, political reforms that set it apart.
And that progressive streak has clearly carried through to today, making Minnesota stand out in the Midwest. It's considered a reliable base for the Democratic Party. It's voted for every Democratic presidential nominee since 1976. That's a longer streak than any other state.
Wow, since 76?
Yeah. And get this, it's the only state that didn't vote for Ronald Reagan in either of his landslide wins. That's a pretty strong political statement.
That is a huge political outlier, an incredible consistency. And the state's Democratic Party even has that unique name, The Minnesota Democratic Farmer Labor Party, the DFL.
Right, the DFL.
Formed back in 1944 from an alliance of the state's Democratic and Farmer Labor parties. That name itself shows its deep roots with workers and agriculture.
And it's not just the two main parties. Minnesota has a history of active third parties making noise.
Yeah.
You had the Reform Party, which became the Independence Party, getting Jesse Ventura elected governor in '98. That showed an openness to outsiders.
Yeah, that was huge news.
And the Green Party has a real presence, too, especially in city governments like Minneapolis and Duluth. It points to a political culture that's, maybe a bit more open to alternative voices, willing to look beyond the traditional Democrat-Republican split.
And that openness seems connected to actual engagement because voter turnout in Minnesota is consistently sky high. Our sources say it had the highest percentage turnout in the whole country in the 2008 presidential election, 78.2% of eligible voters, way above the national average.
Incredible.
And they beat that in 2020, hitting nearly 80%, 79.96%. Plus, they have Election Day registration, which makes it super easy for people to vote.
That level of civic participation is really something. And just recently, in 2023, the DFL actually gained control of the governorship and both houses of the legislature, and they passed a wave of significant progressive reforms. That contrasts with earlier times when government was often divided. So yeah, Minnesota's journey, from frontier outpost to tech and medical leader, while confronting its difficult past, it all shapes its modern character, including that very distinctive political leaning. It's a state with deep history, but also real forward momentum. And a huge part of that character, obviously, is tied to its incredible natural environment. What does the geology tell us?
Oh, it's truly amazing how much of Minnesota's identity is literally carved into its rocks and shaped by water. It really is a land of contrasts and just stunning natural abundance. Geographically, it's got a unique spot on the map. It's the second northernmost state after Alaska. And it's the northernmost contiguous state, thanks to that little geographic anomaly, the northwest angle up in Lake of the Woods County.
The angle. Yeah.
That little piece is the only part of the lower 48 states north of the 49th parallel. A quirk of mapmaking that gives it a really northern feel.
And it's big. Minnesota's the 12th largest state. It shares borders with Canada, Manitoba, and Ontario, then Iowa to the south, the Dakotas to the west. And it even has that water boundary with Michigan through Lake Superior. That location hasn't just been trivia. It shaped the fur trade, immigration, and it still shapes economic ties today. Minnesota's like this key northern gateway.
But what just blows my mind is how old the rocks are there. Our sources say Minnesota has some of the oldest rocks on Earth, gneisses that are about 3.6 billion years old.
Billion with a B.
Yeah, that's like 80% as old as the entire planet. You're basically looking at Earth's original crust.
And that ancient history is still visible today. About 2.7 billion years ago, you had basaltic lava flowing out from cracks in an ancient ocean floor. The remnants of that volcanic rock formed what we call the Canadian Shield in northeastern Minnesota. And the roots of those ancient volcanic mountains, plus the action of old Precambrian seas, that's what formed the famous Iron Range in northern Minnesota. Since another period of volcanism about 1.1 billion years ago, things have been geologically much quieter. No major mountain building, but the sea came in and out many times, leaving layers of sedimentary rock behind.
But the real dramatic sculpting happened much more recently, geologically speaking, thanks to massive ice sheets, glaciers. These things are huge, at least a kilometer thick. They just scoured and reshaped the land. The last big one, the Wisconsin glaciation, retreated maybe 12,000 years ago, covering almost all of Minnesota. What's cool, though, is there's this area in the far southeast with steep hills and streams cutting through bedrock. It was untouched by the glaciers.
The driftless zone.
Exactly. The driftless zone. No glacial drift. It looks totally different from the rest of the state, which is mostly flatter, shaped by ice.
Yeah, most of the state is covered in 50 feet or more of that glacial till, the stuff the glaciers left behind. And a truly massive event was the creation of Lake Agassiz up in the northwest about 13,000 years ago. This was an enormous lake, bigger than all the Great Lakes put together today.
Wow.
When it drained, its flat lake bed became the Red River Valley incredibly fertile farmland, one of the best agricultural areas in the world. And the river that drained it, the glacial River Warren, carved out the deep valley of the Minnesota River and also the upper Mississippi Valley below Fort Snelling. Today, though, Minnesota's pretty quiet geologically, just occasional minor earthquakes, very different from its fiery, icy past.
And even though the landscape is generally pretty gentle, rolling hills mostly, there are some surprising elevation changes. The highest point is Eagle Mountain, at 2,301 feet. But it's only about 13 miles away from the lowest point, which is 601 feet, right on the shore of Lake Superior.
Quite a drop in a short distance.
Yeah, it's subtle overall, but you get these dramatic local shifts.
Which brings us right back to Minnesota's defining feature, water. That land of 10,000 lakes nickname. It's not just catchy, it's actually a big understatement.
Right. You said it was higher.
Yeah, our sources say there are actually 11,842 lakes over 10 acres. And if you count all bodies of fresh water over 10 acres, it's 14,420. That sheer abundance of water fundamentally shapes everything: culture, economy, identity.
Over 14,000. That's incredible. But it's not just the number of lakes. Minnesota has this unique spot near Hibbing, up in the northeast, a triple watershed divide. It means rain falling right there can end up in 3 completely different places, flowing south to the Gulf of Mexico via the Mississippi, or east to the Atlantic via the St. Lawrence Seaway, or north to the Arctic Ocean through the Hudson Bay watershed, all from one spot.
Yes.
Amazing hydrology.
It really is. And the major waterways are impressive, too. Minnesota's part of Lake Superior is the biggest water body in the state. Huge area, incredibly deep, holds a massive amount of fresh water. Then you've got 6,564 natural rivers and streams. If you laid them end to end, it'd be 69,000 miles.
69,000 miles.
Yeah, just weaving across the state. The Mississippi River starts its long journey at Lake Itasca. It flows 680 miles just within Minnesota before hitting the Iowa border. It picks up major tributaries like the Minnesota River near Fort Snelling, the St. Croix near Hastings, and then the Red River drains the whole northwest part of the state, flowing north into Canada's Hudson Bay, another unique hydrological feature.
And it's not just lakes and rivers. Our sources point out Minnesota has more wetlands than any other state except Alaska, about 10.6 million acres.
Huge ecological importance there.
Absolutely. Vital for water quality, wildlife habitat.
And all this water, combined with the varied terrain, supports incredible biodiversity and a climate known for its extremes. Minnesota actually spans 4 different ecological provinces. You've got prairie parkland in the southwest and west, eastern broadleaf forest, the big woods in the southeast. That transitions into tallgrass aspen parkland. And then up north, the huge Laurentian mixed forest, pine, spruce, birch, poplars. It's a transition zone between boreal forest and the southern hardwoods. This variety means lots of different habitats.
So even though logging was historically massive, our sources say regrowth and management mean about a third of the state is still forested today, which is pretty good. And thankfully, there are still some patches of original old-growth forest left, places like Chippewa National Forest and especially the Superior National Forest.
Right, which includes the Boundary Waters.
Exactly, the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. Over 1 million acres, something like 400,000 acres of that never logged, just pristine wilderness.
And while some animals have struggled with habitat loss like pine marten, elk, caribou, bison vanished in the 1800s, others are thriving. White-tailed deer, bobcats are doing well.
Yeah.
Minnesota is really notable for having the largest timber wolf population outside of Alaska. That's a good sign for the ecosystem. Plus, healthy numbers of black bears, moose, and even gophers. Plenty of wildlife.
It's also a huge hotspot for birds. It's right on the Mississippi Flyway, so millions of waterfowl, geese, ducks pass through, plus game birds like grouse, pheasants, turkeys, lots of birds of prey, too. Minnesota actually had the most breeding pairs of bald eagles in the lower 48 back in 2007, and you see red-tailed hawks, snowy owls.
Hawk Ridge.
Yeah, Hawk Ridge near Duluth is mentioned as one of the best places in North America to watch migrating raptors. Must be incredible.
And the lakes, naturally, are full of fish. Walleye is huge, bass, muskie, northern pike, great sport fishing. And the streams in the southeast and northeast have trout brook, brown, rainbow, supports a big fishing culture. All this life exists in that continental climate. Really cold winters, pretty hot and humid summers. The temperature swings are wild. The record low is -60 Fahrenheit up near Tower in 96.
-60.
And the record high is 114 Fahrenheit over in Moorhead in 1936. That's a 174-degree difference between the extremes.
Talk about needing a diverse wardrobe. And the weather itself is varied too. Rain, heavy snow, blizzards, intense thunderstorms, hail, derechos, even tornadoes. It keeps you on your toes. The growing season changes a lot too, depending where you are. From just 90 days way up north to 160 days down south near the Mississippi. Precipitation varies too, 19 to 35 inches a year, and droughts do happen every 10 to 50 years, which is tough for farming.
And this raises that critical question. How is climate change affecting this dynamic environment? Our sources confirm Minnesota is warming. It's been happening over the past few years, noticeably, and that's changing habitats, impacting wildlife. For example, the lakes are getting warmer. That's bad news for cold water fish, like trout. They're losing habitat. But warm water fish like bass, Their habitat is actually expanding. It's a clear sign of how these global shifts are playing out locally, affecting the state's natural balance.
And it's clear Minnesotans value this incredible landscape, which has led to a lot of protected lands. The very first state park, Itasca State Park, was set up way back in 1891, specifically to protect the headwaters of the Mississippi. That shows early conservation thinking.
Absolutely. And today, the network is huge. 72 state parks and recreation areas, 58 state forests covering about 4 million acres, numerous state wildlife preserves, all managed by the state DNR. Then you have the federal lands. The Chippewa and Superior National Forest together are massive, 5.5 million acres. And inside the Superior National Forest is the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, over 1 million acres, 1,000 lakes. Just unparalleled canoeing and camping.
Right.
To the west of that is Voyageurs National Park, another beautiful water-focused park.
Right.
And there's the Mississippi National River and Recreation Area, 72-mile corridor right through the Twin Cities, linking historical, cultural, geological sites. This huge network of protected areas really shows a deep commitment to preserving that natural heritage.
It really does. And what's fascinating, as you said, is how that extreme climate and geology seem to have forged a population that doesn't just cope, they thrive outdoors.
Wow.
All year round. That connection is so deep, it's clearly reflected in their culture, their recreation. Which brings us nicely into the human side of Minnesota, the cities, the people, that unique cultural identity.
Exactly. And when you look at Minnesota's human geography, the Twin Cities just dominate. St. Paul's been the capital since 1849, first for the territory, then the state since 58, and it's right next door to Minneapolis, the most populous city. Together, they make up the Twin Cities metro area, the 16th largest in the U.S., and about 55% of the state's entire population lives there. It's the undeniable center of gravity.
And everything outside that core metro area is usually called Greater Minnesota or Outstate Minnesota. And while the metro keeps growing, some counties like Sherburne and Scott doubled their population between 1980 and 2000. A lot of the state, 40 out of 87 counties, actually lost residents during that same time. So you see this concentration happening.
That concentration shapes the state's overall demographics, which are themselves a really interesting, rapidly changing picture. The state has about 5.7 million people now, making it the 22nd most populous state. Its fertility rate is just below replacement level, but the population has grown steadily over the last century, mostly from births, but also significantly from immigration.
Historically, back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, it was mostly European immigrants shaping the state. Scandinavians, Germans, Irish. That gave it that New England of the West character. But more recently, Minnesota's become a major destination for people from Latin America, especially Mexico. From East Africa, lots of Somalis and Ethiopians. And from South and Southeast Asia, Hmong, Vietnamese, Indian communities. This recent diversity is really reshaping the cultural fabric.
Absolutely. It's dramatically changed the racial makeup. As of 2020, the white population was down to about 77.5%. Back in the mid-20th century, it was over 98%. At the same time, you've seen big increases in other groups. The black population is up to 7%, Asian population, 5.3%, people identifying as two or more races, 6.1%. It's not just numbers, it's a huge cultural enrichment.
And Minnesota has some really unique demographic claims to fame because of this. It has the largest Somali population in the entire country, a really vibrant community making huge contributions. It also has the largest Hmong population per capita, and remarkably, it still has the largest Norwegian American and Swedish American populations in the U.S. That shows how those earlier waves of immigration left a lasting mark, too.
And something particularly noteworthy is Minnesota's role as a leader in refugee resettlement. Since the 1960s, it's been a major destination. As of 2018, it had the largest refugee population per capita of any state.
Per capita, wow.
Yeah. Think about it. Minnesota has about 2% of the U.S. population, but it welcomed 13% of the country's refugees. The largest groups recently have been Hmong, Somalis, Ethiopians, Vietnamese, but also significant numbers of Burmese, Liberians, Ecuadorians, Congolese, Russians, Ukrainians. This commitment to welcoming refugees profoundly shapes the state's multicultural feel and its progressive image.
This incredible diversity naturally shows up in the state's religious landscape, too. Historically, Catholic missionaries were the first Christian influence back in the 17th, 18th centuries. Then the 19th century European settlers, especially Scandinavians, brought Protestantism, and Lutheranism became really prominent, almost part of the state identity early on.
Right, the Lutheran stereotype.
Exactly. Irish immigrants also kept Catholicism significant. The Archdiocese of St. Paul in Minneapolis serves a large Catholic community today.
But over the 20th and 21st centuries, more immigration brought growth in other Christian groups and also non-Christian faiths. So now you have thriving Buddhist communities, Hengvung folk religion practitioners, Muslim communities, Hindu communities, plus a sizable and active Jewish community. And like elsewhere in the U.S., there's a growing number of people, about 20% back in 2014, who identify as non-religious. That reflects broader trends.
And language-wise, while English is dominant, maybe 90% of residents speak it, Minnesota actually has no official language. That allows for linguistic diversity. Our sources mention significant numbers of people speaking Spanish, Somali, Hmong, Vietnamese, Chinese, Russian, Arabic, Amharic, Karen. It really paints a picture of a state where many languages are spoken, adding to that multicultural richness.
Which leads us into Minnesota's economy. It's
Yeah.
robust, dynamic, and it's really changed from those early days of just farming and mining. It used to be mostly about shipping out raw materials. Now the focus is much more on finished products and high-level services. Its economic diversity is actually pretty similar to the U.S. economy as a whole now, which is a real strength, shows its adaptability.
Definitely shows foresight and adaptation. Back in 2019, Minnesota's GDP was around $383 billion, pretty substantial. And it's a headquarters hub for some huge companies. 33 of the top 1,000 publicly traded U.S. companies are based there. We're talking giants like Target in retail, United Health Group in healthcare, 3M in manufacturing and innovation, General Mills in food, U.S. Bancorp in finance, Best Buy. The list goes on. These companies cover a wide range of sectors.
And it's not just the public companies. Minnesota's home to some massive private companies, too. Cargill, for example. It's the largest privately owned company in the entire United States, headquartered right there, an agricultural and industrial powerhouse.
Cargill, yeah.
And Carlson Companies, which owns Radisson Hotels, another big private employer, highlighting strength in hospitality, too. This economic muscle shows up in income levels, too. Minnesota ranked 13th highest in the U.S. for both per capita income and median household income in 2019. Suggests a pretty high standard of living overall.
But those traditional industries, they haven't vanished. They've just evolved. Agriculture is still huge. Minnesota ranks 6th nationally in the value of farm products sold. It's the nation's top producer of things like sugar beets, sweet corn, peas for processing, and farm-raised turkeys, plus a major producer of corn and soybeans.
Still a breadbasket in many ways.
Yeah. And forestry, logging, pulp, paper that remains strong too. A mix of old and new.
The mining industry has also transformed but endured. The really high-grade iron ore is mostly gone now. But taconite mining continues, using processes developed right there in Minnesota to make lower-grade ore usable. As recently as 2016, the state produced 60% of the country's usable iron ore, still feeding American industry. That mining boom originally built up the port of Duluth, which is still vital today for shipping ore, coal, farm products out onto the Great Lakes.
And manufacturing has changed dramatically, too. Now you have cutting-edge tech and biomedical firms right alongside the older food processors and heavy industries. Retail innovation has history here, too. The very first enclosed shopping mall in the whole country, Southdale Center, was built in Edina, a suburb of Minneapolis.
Southdale, yeah, iconic.
And of course, the biggest mall in the country now, the Mall of America, is in Bloomington.
Yeah.
That really changed the retail game.
Looking at the big picture of who employs people, our sources from 2025 list the largest employers. Mayo Clinic is number 1, with almost 57,000 employees. Then the state of Minnesota itself, Target, M Health Fairview, Health Partners, University of Minnesota. These really highlight the state's strengths: healthcare, government, retail, education. They're the big economic drivers.
It's interesting to look at the state's tax structure, too. It has a progressive income tax, 4 brackets, going from about 5.35% up to 9.85%. Back in 2008, Minnesota ranked 12th highest in the U.S. for total state and local taxes per capita. Residents paid about 10.2% of their income, a bit above the national average then, suggests a state willing to invest in public services.
Right. The state sales tax is 6.875%. But importantly, they exempt essentials like clothing, prescription drugs, and most food you buy to eat at home. That helps lessen the burden. Cities can also have their own local sales taxes. Minneapolis has a supplemental 0.5% tax, for example, and you have excise taxes on things like alcohol, tobacco, gasoline, plus property taxes paid to counties, cities, school districts. It's a pretty diverse revenue system overall.
So what's the takeaway here? Minnesota's journey from that frontier place to a tech and medical leader while also facing its past. That really defines its character today, including those distinct political leanings. This blend of economic strength and progressive values seems deeply connected to its culture. And that culture, it's not just museums and traditions, it feels like a whole way of life. From the diverse people to the innovative companies, all shaped by that deep bond with the unique environment which they really embrace, whether it's sunny, raining, or blizzarding.
That really poses the question, doesn't it? In our globalized world, how does Minnesota keep such a distinct identity? From the Minnesota nice stereotype to its specific mix of industries, that passionate outdoor life, how does it hold on to that while also being the center of innovation and a welcoming place for refugees from all over? It shows this remarkable capacity to both preserve traditions and adapt. And its cultural scene is definitely vibrant. Our sources confirm that.
Oh, absolutely. The fine art scene is top-notch. World-class museums like the Minneapolis Institute of Art, the Walker Art Center, the Weissman Art Museum, the Museum of Russian Art, all in Minneapolis. You've got major orchestras, the Minnesota Orchestra, the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra. The Guthrie Theater is world-renowned. It moved into that amazing building overlooking the Mississippi in 2006 with 3 stages, and people actually go to things. Attendance at theater, music, comedy is really strong there. It shows a truly engaged arts community.
It really does. Minneapolis actually ranks second only to New York City in the number of theater companies per capita.
Second only to New York.
Yeah, selling something like 2.3 million theater tickets annually in the Twin Cities back in 2006. That's serious cultural engagement. And the Minnesota Fringe Festival in Minneapolis is another huge event. Theater, dance, improv, puppets, kids shows, visual art, musicals, over 800 performances in 11 days. It's the biggest non-juried performing arts festival in the country. Just an incredible explosion of creativity.
And the literary giants from Minnesota, they've really shaped American literature. You've got Ole Rulvog writing about the harshness of pioneer life in Giants in the Earth. Laura Ingalls Wilder's Little House books, so rooted in that landscape.
Classics.
Sinclair Lewis gave us a pretty sharp picture of small-town life in Main Street. Garrison Keillor offered a warmer, fuzzier version with his Lake Wobegon tales, capturing that unique Midwestern feel. F. Scott Fitzgerald, a St. Paul native, wrote about the city's social scene in stories like Winter Dreams.
And you can't forget Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. His famous poem, The Song of Hiawatha, was inspired by Minnesota, and he ended up naming lots of places and lakes there through the poem, embedded it in the national imagination. And more recently, Bob Dylan, Minnesota native, Nobel Prize winner for literature. That cements the state's literary and musical legacy right there.
The music legacy is amazing, too, way beyond Dylan. You've got Prince, obviously, Eddie Cochran, the Andrews Sisters, the Trashmen.
Surfing Bird.
Exactly. Soul Asylum, Husker Du, Semisonic, The Replacements, Owl City. From the Andrews Sisters' WWII hits to the 60s surf rock, Bob Dylan's folk, then the 80s funk and pop explosion with Prince, Jimmy Jam, and Terry Lewis, the Jets, Lip Sync, Information Society. Just a huge range of influential music came out of Minnesota.
And Minnesotans have made huge marks in comedy, media, film, too. Peanuts, one of the most loved comic strips ever, created by Charles M. Schulz from St. Paul. A Prairie Home Companion, that long-running comedy radio show known for its folksy charm, started there in '74.
A true institution.
The cult sci-fi comedy show Mystery Science Theater 3000, created by Joel Hodgson in Hopkins, Minnesota, that unique sense of humor again. And The Daily Show, originated by Minnesotans Liz Winstead and Madeline Smithberg.
Quite the comedy factory. And filmmaking, the Coen brothers with their unmistakable style. Terry Gilliam, Bill Pohlad, Mike Todd. And the actors, Judy Garland, Jessica Lange, Chris Pratt, Winona Ryder, Vince Vaughn, even Governor Jesse Ventura, Lonnie Anderson, Richard Dean Anderson. The list is long. Serious talent comes out of Minnesota.
And all this feeds into those persistent stereotypes, right? Minnesota nice, that polite, maybe indirect way of talking. The strong Lutheran influence, historically. That deep sense of community, often shown through potlucks featuring hot dish.
Ah, hot dish. Gotta mention hot dish.
It's basically a casserole, a quintessential comfort food. And that distinctive accent, the North Central American English, sometimes with Scandinavian hints. Some folks with Scandinavian roots still hold traditional lutefisk dinners for Christmas, keeping those traditions alive.
And you see these things reflected in pop culture all the time. Movies like The Coens, Fargo, obviously, Grumpy Old Men, Prince's Purple Rain, TV shows like Little House on the Prairie, The Mary Tyler Moore Show, The Golden Girls, Rosen Island, even How I Met Your Mother. Marshall Erickson. It's fascinating how these cultural details have sort of seeped into the American mainstream, often with a mix of warmth and gentle ribbing.
And nowhere is that culture more on display, more celebrated than the Minnesota State Fair, the Great Minnesota Get-Together. It's iconic, a symbol of the state. And the attendance is just staggering. Think about this. In 2014, the state population was 5.5 million. Over 1.8 million people went to the fair that year, a record.
That's almost a third of the state.
Exactly. That level of engagement is almost unheard of. It's not just a fair, it's a core cultural ritual, a unique expression of being Minnesotan.
That is truly amazing participation. And the fair itself is just this incredible mix of everything Minnesota: fine art, science exhibits, agriculture, food contests, 4-H projects, music everywhere, the midway rides, corporate booths. It's famous for those unique things like seed art, intricate pictures made from seeds, butter sculptures of the dairy princesses, the birthing barn where you can see animals born.
Yeah, the Miracle of Birth barn.
The fattest pig contest. And our sources even mention John Philip Sousa premiered his Minnesota March there in 1927. And of course, the food, especially food on a stick. Everything imaginable served on a stick. It's a culinary adventure. And lots of county fairs replicate this on a smaller scale, too.
And beyond the state fair, Minnesota has tons of other big annual festivals. The St. Paul Winter Carnival, they fully embrace the cold. The Minnesota Renaissance Festival is huge. Minneapolis has its Aquatennial, the Mill City Music Festival. There's Moondance Jam up in Walker. The Judy Garland Festival in her hometown of Grand Rapids. The quirky Eelpout Festival on Leech Lake. We Fest in Detroit Lakes for country music fans. These events just highlight that strong community spirit, that dedication to celebrating together no matter the season.
And this engagement with community, with the outdoors, it seems reflected in Minnesota's generally excellent health and education stats, key quality of life markers that point to public investment. Minnesotans tend to have low rates of premature death, infant mortality, heart disease, workplace fatalities. They have long life expectancies, high rates of health insurance coverage, high rates of regular exercise. Makes for a healthy population overall.
Yeah, for a while, Minnesota was ranked the healthiest state in the nation by a couple of groups because of those factors. The one ranking saw it slip a bit, from first down to sixth between 2005 and 2009.
Yeah.
That was attributed partly to lower public health funding levels and issues like binge drinking rates. And it's really important to note, while the overall stats are good, there are significant health disparities affecting minority populations in Minnesota. That's an area needing ongoing attention.
Public health policies have definitely played a role, though, like the Freedom to Breathe Act in 2007, which banned smoking in restaurants and bars statewide. That shows a commitment to healthier public spaces.
And the healthcare infrastructure itself is world-class. You have major systems like Alena, CentraCare, Essentia, Health Partners, mHealth Fairview. And then there's a Mayo Clinic health system based in Rochester, founded by Dr. William Worrell Mayo. It's just consistently ranked among the very best medical centers in the world.
Truly top tier.
Yeah, in the U.S. News & World Report rankings for 2020-21, Mayo was top 4 in most specialties and number 1 overall on their Best Hospitals Honor Roll. Just exceptional medical care.
That's an incredible asset for the state, putting it right at the forefront of medicine. Minnesota also has 2 major teaching hospitals and medical schools. The University of Minnesota Medical School is highly rated, known for research breakthroughs. It's a big driver of the state's growing biotech industry.
And Mayo and the U of M actually collaborate through the Minnesota Partnership for Biotechnology and Medical Genomics. It's state-funded, researching critical diseases like cancer, Alzheimer's, heart disease, obesity, fostering that scientific collaboration.
And that commitment to health is really mirrored in education. It started super early in state history. One of the very first things the Minnesota legislature did in 1858 was set up a normal school in Winona, basically, a teacher training college, showing the importance of education right from the start.
Laying the foundation.
Exactly, and it's paid off. Minnesota consistently ranks high in educational attainment. In 2009, it had the second highest percentage of high school graduates and 10th highest for bachelor's degrees. A well-educated population.
Absolutely. Minneapolis was even named the most literate city in the U.S. in 2015, with St. Paul placing 4th. That says a lot. And academically, the students performed really well on average. A 2013 international study comparing 8th graders in math and science ranked Minnesota 8th in the world and 3rd in the U.S.
8th in the world? Wow.
Yeah, pretty impressive. And Minnesota students consistently score well on standardized tests like the ACT, ranking 10th highest nationally in 2014. Interestingly, while per-student spending on public education was around 21st nationally in 2013, Minnesota has been an innovator. It was home to the very first charter school in the country. Shows a willingness to try new models.
And the higher education system is really strong and varied. You have the Minnesota State Colleges and University System with 37 institutions. The University of Minnesota system has 5 major campuses, and it's recognized globally. Plus, there are over 20 private colleges and universities. 6 of those consistently rank among the top 100 liberal arts colleges nationally. So lots of quality options.
And supporting all this quality of life is a really robust transportation network. MNDOT, the Minnesota Department of Transportation, oversees it at the state level, working with local governments. The main highway corridors radiate out from the Twin Cities and run along the interstates across greater Minnesota. I-35, I-90, I-94 are the big ones. I-35 and I-94 connect Minneapolis and St. Paul, while I-90 runs east-west across the southern part of the state.
A key thing for funding happened in 2006. Voters passed a constitutional amendment dedicating sales taxes from motor vehicles directly to transportation. And crucially, at least 40% of that money has to go to public transit. That ensures steady funding for buses and rail, showing a real commitment.
The state also has nearly 24 rail corridors, mostly running through the Twin Cities or Duluth, mostly freight, but some passenger service. And water transport is still important via the Mississippi River system, and especially the ports on Lake Superior for shipping or coal grain.
For flying, Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, MSP, is the main hub. It's a major center for Delta and Sun Country Airlines, handling passengers and freight. You can also get commercial jet service in Duluth and Rochester, and smaller cities have commuter flights connecting them, ensuring pretty good air access across the state.
Public transit is extensive too. Metro Transit covers the Twin Cities. Other suburbs have their own systems, and cities in greater Minnesota have bus services. There's also Dial-A-Ride for people with disabilities in most counties, which is great for accessibility. For travel between cities, you've got Amtrak's Empire Builder Train, which stops in St. Paul and 5 other towns, plus bus lines like Jefferson Lines, Greyhound, Megabus. And within the Twin Cities, you have local rail, the North Star commuter line coming in from the northwest suburbs, and the light rail green line connecting Minneapolis and St. Paul, and the blue line going out to the airport and Mall of America. It's a pretty comprehensive multimodal system.
And the media scene is just as developed. The Twin Cities area is the 15th largest media market in the U.S. That's pretty significant reach. Other markets like Fargo-Moorhead, Duluth Superior, Rochester, Mankato ensure coverage across the state.
Local TV broadcasting started early there, back in 1948 with KSTP-TV. Hubbard Broadcasting, which owns KSTP, is actually the only locally owned TV company left in Minnesota. That's rare these days. The CBS station, WCCO, and the FIX station, KMSP, in the Twin Cities are owned by the networks themselves. Overall, lots of local stations broadcasting.
Print media is strong, too. The big 4 daily papers are the Star Tribune in Minneapolis, the Pioneer Press in St. Paul, the Duluth News Tribune, and the Rochester Post-Bulletin, essential local news sources. And the Minnesota Daily, the student paper at the U of M, is apparently the largest student-run newspaper in the country. Great training ground.
Wow.
Plus lots of weeklies, monthlies, and web-based news sites. A pretty rich media mix.
Public radio has an especially powerful presence in Minnesota. 2 of the biggest public radio networks in the country, Minnesota Public Radio, NPR, and Public Radio International, PRI, are actually based there.
Both based there.
Yeah, shows real leadership in public broadcasting. NPR has the biggest audience of any regional public radio network nationwide, broadcasting on 46 stations across Minnesota. And PRI provides hundreds of hours of programming weekly to nearly 800 stations across the U.S. Plus, the state's oldest radio station, KUOMM, started in 1922, is one of the 10 oldest in the country and still going, run by the University of Minnesota. A long legacy there.
Which brings us finally to something that truly defines Minnesotans. Their passion for sports and outdoor recreation. It really reflects that active lifestyle, that connection to the environment. They've organized sports at all levels, amateur and pro.
Yeah.
And tourism, especially around the lakes, is a huge industry now. That North Country area, once all about mining and logging, is now largely a vacation destination focused on recreation.
And that deep interest in the environment, in conservation, combined with traditional hunting and fishing interests, has drawn in a huge urban audience too. It's all connected. Outdoor activity is just core to the culture. Part of that Minnesota nice includes loving and respecting the natural world.
And Minnesota is a major league state for sports, professional men's teams in all the big leagues.
Yeah.
You've got the Minnesota Vikings in the NFL. They went to 4 Super Bowls, famously. The Minnesota Twins in baseball since '61. They won the World Series twice, in '87 and '91, both times, in thrilling 7-game series where the home team won every single game. They also made the World Series in '65.
Incredible home field advantage there.
Basketball has deep roots, too. The Minneapolis Lakers played in the NBA from '47 to '60, winning championships before moving to L.A., shows Minnesota's early impact.
Right, the original Lakers.
The Minnesota Timberwolves joined the NBA in '89. And hockey. Oh, hockey's huge. The NHL's Minnesota Wild play in St. Paul. They had this incredible streak of 300 consecutive sold-out games back in 2008. Shows the passion.
The state of hockey.
Exactly. Before the Wild, the Minnesota North Stars were here from 67 to 93, reaching the Stanley Cup Finals twice.
Soccer's big now, too. Minnesota United FC joined Major League Soccer in 2017, and women's pro sports are thriving. The Minnesota Lynx and the WNBA are absolute powerhouses. 4 championships, 2011, 13, 15, 17, one of the most successful teams in league history.
Amazing record.
Plus, you have teams in women's soccer, football, hockey. Strong support across the board.
College sports are huge too, especially hockey, again. The University of Minnesota's main campus competes in the Big Ten, a major athletic conference. But 4 other schools in the state also play Division I hockey. UMD, Minnesota State Mankato, St. Cloud State, Bemidji State. That just underlines how deep hockey runs there.
Minneapolis has hosted the NCAA men's Final Four basketball tournament 4 times, 51, 92, 2001, 2019. Big national events. And golf, too. Hazeltine National Golf Club has hosted the U.S. Open, Women's Open, Senior Open, PGA Championship, and the Ryder Cup in 2016, with another coming in 2028. Interlaken Country Club has hosted big events, too. Minnesota's definitely on the pro golf map.
And Minnesotans have shown on the Olympic stage as well. That legendary 1980 Miracle on Ice hockey team. 12 of the 20 players were from Minnesota. And the coach, Herb Brooks, was a Minnesotan too. Just incredible contribution.
Unbelievable.
The U.S. men's curling teams that won bronze in 2006 and gold in 2018 had strong Minnesota connections. Swimmer Tom Malchow won Olympic gold and silver, real Olympic pedigree.
Beyond the big leagues, you have major endurance events. Grandma's Marathon at the North Shore of Lake Superior, the Twin Cities Marathon, both draw huge crowds. And fittingly, the United States Hockey Hall of Fame is located in Eveleth, Minnesota, a shrine to the sport that's so central to the state's identity.
It's just clear that Minnesotans are incredibly active people, high rates of physical activity, so much of it outdoors. That connection to nature is even credited with fostering the state's strong environmental ethic. People protect what they love and use.
Absolutely. In summer, it's all about the water. Those weekend trips to the family cabin on the lake, that's a sacred tradition for many. Boating, canoeing, fishing. Like you said, over 36% of Minnesotans fish, second only to Alaska. And fun fact, water skiing was actually invented in Minnesota.
No way, water skiing.
Yep, originated right there on the Minnesota lake.
That's fantastic.
And what's really distinctive is how they don't just tolerate winter, they embrace it. Ice fishing goes way back to the early Scandinavian immigrants, still huge today. People are out skating, playing hockey, curling, broomball, cross-country skiing, downhill skiing, luge, snowshoeing, and snowmobiling. Almost 20,000 miles of snowmobile trails across the state.
Yeah.
Minnesota is also the only U.S. state where bandy, that unique kind of ice hockey, is played. They really make the most of the cold.
And all year, those state and national forests, the 72 state parks, they're used constantly for hunting, camping, hiking. Minnesota actually has more miles of bike trails than any other state.
More than any other?
Yeah. And a growing network of hiking trails, like that amazing 235-mile Superior hiking trail up northeast. And many of those trails get groomed for cross-country skiing in the winter. It really is a year-round outdoor playground, just baked into the lifestyle.
Which brings us back to that intriguing question we raised earlier. In this increasingly connected, globalized world, how does Minnesota hold on to such a distinct culture? That nice stereotype, the specific industries, the passionate outdoor life. How does it maintain that while also being this hub of global innovation and a welcoming place for people from everywhere? It really points to a remarkable ability to blend tradition and adaptation, stability and change.
So the next time you hear Land of 10,000 Lakes, maybe remember it's really just scratching the surface. There's so much more that makes Minnesota remarkable. What unexpected fact or connection stood out most to you listening today?
Indeed. When you look at it all, from its incredibly ancient rocks to its dynamic, multicultural present, Minnesota offers this profound lesson. A lesson in how a place's deepest character is shaped by geological time, by human history, by conflict and cooperation, and by the sheer tenacity of its people. Maybe being the North Star State isn't just about geography. Maybe it's also about guiding toward the unique way of blending progress with deeply rooted identity and a powerful connection to both community and the natural world.